Ringo Starr just turned 85, but his birthday celebration has left fans deeply concerned. The Beatles drummer broke down in tears during his annual Peace and Love moment, an emotional tradition he's held for years. After falling ill and forcing the cancellation of shows in Philadelphia and New York, doctors advised rest, but many sensed something more serious was going on. For the first time ever, he publicly mourned John and George during his birthday speech, his voice shaking with emotion. What's really going on with the last surviving Beatle that's got everyone so worried? Richard Starkey was born on July 7, 1940, at 9 Madron Street in Liverpool. That summer, German bombs fell on the city almost every night. His parents tried to stay calm, but the world around them was shaking. His father, Richard Starkey Sr., a baker, was already starting to drift away. When little Richard was 3 years old, his father left and never returned. His mother, Elsie, was suddenly on her own, doing the best she could to raise him herself. She put in long hours cleaning by day and serving as a barmaid by night, earning little more than enough to pay the rent and buy groceries. In 1944, they had to find a cheaper house. They just couldn't afford to stay where they were. Then, things got even worse. When Richard was 6, his appendix burst. What seemed like a routine surgery quickly turned into a nightmare when he developed peritonitis, a life-threatening infection. He slipped into a coma for days, and doctors weren't sure he would survive. He spent nearly a year in the hospital, apart from his mother. When he was finally discharged in May 1948, he was 8 years old, but he couldn't read or count properly. Still, he didn't complain. He just kept going. When he was 13, he had finally caught up at school with the help of tutors, and tragedy struck again. In 1953, a tuberculosis outbreak swept through his school, and Richard fell ill once more. He was sent to a special sanatorium, where he stayed for 2 long years. It was a lonely, quiet place. No friends, no school, just silence. Then, one day, a nurse took out a cotton bobbin mallet and told him to tap it against a metal cabinet for fun. That simple sound sparked something inside him. Soon afterward, a worker gave him a record titled Bedtime for Drums, and he couldn't get enough. For the first time, he felt like he had something that truly belonged to him. He grew up in Dingle, one of Liverpool's roughest districts, during a time when street fights were common and danger lurked around every corner. He joined a gang to survive. The violence never stopped. Once, he got a beating from another gang so bad that it changed how he thought about himself forever. Small, quiet, and unsure of his place in the world, he turned to music as an escape. It was his purpose, the one thing that gave him hope. In 1956, when he turned 16, he found employment as an apprentice machinist in a factory. That's where he met Roy Trafford, who introduced him to skiffle, a combination of jazz, folk, and blues. Together with another factory worker, Eddie Miles, they would practice at the factory basement and put a band together. The next Christmas of 1957, Richard's stepfather gave him his first drum kit. 2 months later, he joined the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group and played on July 31, 1957, his first real gig at Liverpool's Cavern Club. He spent his days at the factory and his nights behind the drums. Music was the only thing that really made him happy. In November 1959, he was invited to join another group called the Hurricanes. They soon changed their name to Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, and that's when Richard adopted the stage name Ringo Starr. He loved wearing rings, and Starr made him sound like someone destined for the spotlight. During shows, his solo moments were called Star Time, and he performed songs such as Boys by the Shirelles. By 1960, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were bigger in Liverpool than even the Beatles. That October, they were booked to play in Hamburg, Germany, in the city's notorious red light district. Hamburg was wild. George Harrison called it the naughtiest city in the world, while Paul McCartney joked that every woman there seemed to be a stripper or a prostitute. The musicians played all night, lived on almost no sleep, drank constantly, and experimented with drugs. It was chaos. On November 29, 1960, Paul and drummer Pete Best were arrested for lighting a condom on fire to see in the dark, and they were deported a few days later. But amid the madness, Ringo managed to keep his feet on the ground. In October of that same year, he recorded with John, Paul, and George for the very first time when Pete Best couldn't make the session. It was October 15th, 1960, and they played backup for Lou Walters on a song called Summertime, way before anyone knew the Beatles' name. In 1961, the Beatles recorded Cry for a Shadow with Tony Sheridan, while Ringo and his band continued to barely scrape by. He was getting so discouraged at times that he thought of emigrating to America. Yet somehow, Ringo couldn't get rid of this haunting feeling that his fate was connected with those three boys from Liverpool. By early 1962, Pete Best began missing shows. On February 5th, Ringo filled in again. George Harrison would later say, "This is it." The band wanted Ringo permanently, but he was still under contract with the Hurricanes. He didn't know it at the time, but that one performance would change his life forever. On August 16th, 1962, Pete Best was suddenly fired. 2 days later, Ringo officially became a Beatle.
But it wasn't an easy transition. Fans were furious. At their first show with Ringo on August 19th at the Cavern Club, half the crowd chanted, "Pete forever, Ringo never." Even George Harrison got headbutted in a hallway and showed up on stage with a black eye. Objects were thrown. Ringo received death threats. For weeks, he was heckled in the streets and wondered if joining the band had been a mistake. On September 4th, 1962, his first recording session at Abbey Road came under producer George Martin, who was unimpressed. Just a week later, Martin replaced him with session drummer Andy White and had Ringo play tambourine instead. Ringo was humiliated, thinking, "They're doing to me what they did to Pete." He feared it was the end before it even began. During the 1963 tours, the other Beatles were constantly testing him, hiding his drums, lying about showtimes, and inventing fake emergencies to see if he could handle the stress. Once in Wales, the whole band had to borrow another group's instruments because theirs had mysteriously disappeared. Through it all, Ringo remained calm, gradually winning their respect. Being left-handed, but playing on a right-handed kit, gave his drumming a unique rhythm, an odd technique that became part of the signature sound of the Beatles. And he had practiced endlessly, terrified of being replaced. That worry never left him. On June 3, 1964, shortly before the band's world tour, Ringo collapsed during a photo shoot with a fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Doctors diagnosed tonsillitis. The Beatles had a decision to make about whether to cancel U.S. shows or find a temporary replacement. They brought in Jimmy Nicol, and Ringo missed 8 shows across Denmark, Holland, and Australia. George Harrison was so upset he threatened to quit the tour. Not wanting to lose his place, Ringo refused surgery, flew to Australia while still ill, and rejoined the band on June 15, 1964, in Melbourne. That illness almost ended everything they had built. The night the Beatles landed at JFK Airport on February 7, 1964, they had no idea what awaited them. More than 4,000 screaming fans were outside, long before doors opened. Ringo smiled, oblivious to his coming fate as an international sensation. His goofy charm made him the instant darling, but adoration soon turned hazardous. Just 4 months later, a crowd of 500 schoolgirls swarmed the airport in San Francisco during a short layover just to see him on June 13th. 5 fainted from hysteria. One, 18-year-old Helena Rand, president of California's Beatles fan club, managed to hand Ringo a surfer shirt before collapsing in his arms. Police formed a human shield around him to prevent him from being crushed. 20 officers kept the crowd under control. Through it all, Ringo kept smiling. "I enjoy it," he said. But Beatlemania was only just beginning. Ringo was a natural comedian and scene stealer while filming A Hard Day's Night in 1964, but behind the charm was